leather binder, Your Honor. How Elijah took on the justice system. Before we dive into this incredible story of courage and brilliance, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to join our community of story lovers. Now, let's explore how young Elijah found himself challenging one of the most powerful judges in Oakwood, Maryland. Elijah Thompson wasn't like most 11. While his peers were busy with video games and sports, Elijah's sharp mind was drawn to the complex world of laws and court cases. Living in the modest Pine Hills neighborhood of Oakwood, Elijah shared a close bond with his mother, Tanya Thompson. Despite tough times, Tanya, a nurse working exhausting shifts at Oakwood General Hospital and Riverside Medical Center, always made time to support Elijah, helping with his homework and encouraging his interest in legal matters. Their simple life took a devastating turn one rainy Tuesday. Tanya had recently reported unsafe staffing conditions affecting the predominantly black East Wing of the hospital. Her supervisor, Harold Jenkins, stern man with thinning blonde hair, dismissed her concerns with blatant disdain. "Your people always want special treatment," he sneered when she presented documented proof of the disparity. Just 3 days after filing her formal complaint, Tanya was summoned to administration, where security and police were waiting. They claimed a routine locker check found stolen medication in her belongings, drugs Tanya had never seen before. Elijah was at the kitchen table doing homework when his mother called from county jail, her voice trembling. "They say I took fentanyl patches and oxycodone," she whispered, trying to stay strong. "I would never do that. Someone planted those drugs." A cold dread filled Elijah as he heard her tears over the phone. The next day, family friend and paralegal Marcus Davis took Elijah to visit Tanya at the detention center. Under harsh fluorescent lights, Tanya looked older than her 36 years. "Focus on school, baby," she urged, squeezing his hand. The public defender promised they'd figure it out, but Elijah noticed the guards' harsh treatment of Tanya compared to their respectful attitude toward white visitors. On the drive back, Marcus warned Elijah the case had been assigned to Judge Richard Williams, a man known for handing black defendants sentences 40% longer than white defendants with similar charges. Elijah stared out the window, already making a decision. "I'm going to help her," he said quietly but firmly. Marcus, concerned, reminded him, "You're 11. This is complicated." But Elijah was resolute. That night, Elijah began investigating. Calls to Tanya's co-workers mostly went unanswered. Fear silenced them. "We've been told not to talk," one nurse whispered before hanging up, unfazed. Elijah created a detailed timeline of events around Tanya's arrest, spotting inconsistencies. At the courthouse for Tanya's arraignment, Elijah experienced the system's racial bias firsthand. White visitors passed security with quick bag checks, but he was searched thoroughly and questioned about his legal notebooks. Inside the courtroom, Elijah observed Judge Williams' starkly different treatment of defendants, respectful toward white people, condescending and impatient with black and brown defendants. His resolve grew stronger. Tanya faced not just false accusations, but a system built to presume guilt. Determined, Elijah turned the Oakwood Public Library into his second home. Each day after school, he pored over legal texts, medical journals, and newspaper archives. The librarian, Mrs. Patel, soon became an ally, helping him find relevant materials. She shared, "My nephew's a defense attorney. The system treats people differently based on who they are." Elijah's mind cataloged every detail. He found that the alleged theft occurred during a 30-minute window, when hospital security cameras in the East Wing mysteriously malfunctioned. He discovered 3 prior cases where black nurses were accused of medication theft under the same supervisor. Harold Jenkins' cases dismissed or resolved only after exhausting legal battles. At the courthouse, Elijah met Rosalind Baker, a seasoned black clerk with over 30 years' experience. She noticed his struggle with public records and gently guided him. When he explained Tanya's case, Mrs. Baker's expression changed. "Your mother was the only nurse who noticed when my sister's medication wasn't working last year," she said. From then on, Mrs. Baker quietly helped Elijah navigate the complex court system, even slipping him records he couldn't otherwise access. Through Mrs. Baker, Elijah learned that Tanya's public defender, Alan Porter, was overwhelmed with 87 active cases and had barely reviewed her file. Determined, Elijah memorized key statutes and case law, preparing to fight. One day, Elijah overheard Judge Williams and Prosecutor Victoria Harmon speaking callously outside chambers. Planning to make an example of Tanya, the prosecutor laughed, confident it would be like shooting fish in a barrel. Elijah's heart sank. His mother had no criminal record and was being vilified unfairly. School became a struggle. Rumors spread, and classmates taunted him harshly. His usually bright demeanor dimmed until his English teacher, Miss Diana Chin, noticed and offered support. Sharing his research with her, Elijah received encouragement and helped to organize his findings more clearly. With renewed focus, Elijah highlighted critical gaps in the hospital's security, footage especially a 48-hour period missing from the medication dispensary cameras. The IT report cited a system error as the cause. Armed with growing evidence of procedural flaws, Elijah prepared for his mother's preliminary hearing, ready to fight for justice. The justice system wasn't designed to listen to the voice of an 11-year-old black boy, but Elijah Thompson was determined to speak up, and he was arming himself with enough knowledge to make sure his voice couldn't be ignored. On the morning of Tanya Thompson's preliminary hearing, heavy rain soaked Elijah to the bone as he and Marcus hurried from the parking lot to the courthouse. In the restroom, Elijah nervously adjusted his navy blue tie, a Christmas gift from his mother that he'd never had a reason to wear before. Staring at his reflection, he saw a small boy trying hard to look older, more serious, someone who belonged in a courtroom. The weight of his mother's fate pressed heavily on his young shoulders. When they entered the courtroom, it was nearly empty, only a few bored attorneys, a court reporter setting up her equipment, and two uniformed officers standing by the side door. Elijah and Marcus took front row seats in the public gallery, directly behind where Tanya would sit. Elijah's leather binder, filled with all his research and notes, rested heavily on his lap. "Remember?" Marcus whispered. "The preliminary hearing is just to decide if there's enough evidence to proceed to trial. Don't get your hopes up." Elijah nodded, but his eyes never left the side door. When Tanya arrived, escorted by a female corrections officer, she seemed smaller than usual, her normally perfect hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face drawn and exhausted. She gave Elijah a faint, reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eyes as more people filed in. Judge Richard Williams entered, a tall man with silver hair and steel-rimmed glasses, who carried himself with the confidence of someone used to absolute authority. His dismissive gaze swept the courtroom before he took his seat. The clerk called the court to order, and the hearing began. Elijah watched as Tanya's public defender, Alan Porter, shuffled papers, looking distracted and unprepared. Then, the prosecutor Victoria Harmon stood and spoke smoothly and confidently. "Your Honor," she said, "the state has clear evidence that Nurse Thompson abused her position of trust to divert controlled substances for personal gain. Hospital inventory logs showed discrepancies multiple times during her shifts. Additionally, the controlled substances were found in her locker during a routine security check." Elijah's grip tightened on his pen. That was a lie. His mother had worked at Oakwood General for 8 years with a spotless record. There had never been repeated discrepancies. As the hearing went on, Judge Williams' bias became clear. When Porter requested reasonable bail, citing Tanya's deep community ties and clean history, The judge scoffed under his breath. These people always have excuses. He continued loudly. The court is aware of the drug diversion epidemic in our hospitals. Ms. Thompson faces serious charges that threaten public safety. When Porter mentioned Tanya's status as a single mother, the judge's expression darkened. Maybe she should have thought about her parental responsibilities before committing a crime. A fierce heat rose in Elijah's chest. Before Marcus could stop him, Elijah stood up. My mom didn't do anything wrong, he said clearly, despite his pounding heart. Judge Williams slammed his gavel. Who is speaking in my courtroom? He demanded, glaring at Elijah. Double quotes, sir. I apologize, Marcus said, placing a hand on Elijah's shoulder. This is the defendant's son. I don't care if he's the president's son, the judge snapped. There are rules here. Young man, this isn't a school field trip. Sit down and be quiet, or you'll be removed. But Elijah persisted, opening his binder. According to State v. Henderson, exculpatory evidence must be presented at preliminary hearings. The prosecution has not disclosed the 48-hour gap in security footage, or the fact that my mother reported staffing violations 3 days before her arrest. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Williams' face darkened with anger and surprise. Sit down, kid. This is a courtroom, not your playground, he barked. One more word and I'll hold your guardian in contempt. Reluctantly, Elijah sat down. The judge turned to Tanya's lawyer. Control your client's family, or this hearing will go very badly for her. For the rest of the hearing, Judge Williams made numerous procedural errors that Elijah carefully noted. He denied Porter's request to see the full security footage. Let the prosecutor cite Tanya's previous workplace issues without evidence, and set bail so high it was clearly punitive by the hearing's end. Tanya was led back to detention, and Elijah's notes filled 3 pages. As they left, Bailiff James Rodriguez, a kind-eyed middle-aged Latino man. That was brave, kid, he said quietly, handing Elijah a courthouse visitor's guide. Stupid, but brave. Only later did Elijah discover the bailiff had slipped his business card inside with a note. My sister works at Riverside Medical. Call me in the hallway. Elijah overheard the prosecutor telling a colleague, Williams wants to make an example of this one. Drug-diverting nurses get off too easy. The colleague laughed. This one picked the wrong judge. He'll throw the book at her. They walked silently to the car. Finally, Marcus spoke. Elijah, I understand your frustration, but challenging a judge in his own courtroom, they're lying about her. Elijah interrupted, his voice tight with emotion. They're making up evidence and ignoring facts. How is that justice? Marcus had no answer. Have you ever witnessed injustice firsthand and felt powerless? Comment below. If you've seen someone abusing their authority, like Judge Williams, comment 1. If you've witnessed racial bias, comment 2. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support stories that reveal hard truths about our justice system. What should Elijah do next? Should he keep fighting these powerful opponents, or risk everything? Let's see how this young legal prodigy begins building his case, despite the overwhelming odds. In the days after the hearing, Elijah's world became a blur of determination and fear. He knew he needed more than just his own research to fight the system that trapped his mother. He needed allies, people with access, knowledge, and courage to stand against injustice, even when it wore judicial robes. His first lead was nurse Letitia Washington, who had worked the same shift as Tanya the night of the alleged theft. Using his mother's old employee directory, Elijah found Letitia's address and spent his Saturday riding 3 buses to reach her in the eastern suburbs. When Letitia opened the door to find a small boy in a neatly pressed shirt, she was confused, then alarmed. You're Tanya's son, she asked, recognition dawning. You shouldn't be here. Glancing nervously down the street, she reluctantly invited him inside. Her modest living room was filled with family photos and nursing school certificates. "I can't help you," she said immediately, wringing her hands. "I still work at Oakwood. I have 3 kids to support." "My mom has 1 kid," Elijah said quietly. "Me. And she's in jail for something she didn't do." Something in his steady gaze made Letitia sit down. "I know Tanya wouldn't steal," she admitted. "She's the most ethical nurse I've ever worked with, always double-checking dosages, reporting discrepancies." Leaning forward, she lowered her voice. "Listen, things aren't right at that hospital. Jenkins has been fiddling with inventory counts for months. When meds go missing, he blames nurses he doesn't like, mostly black nurses from the East Wing." "Would you sign a statement saying that?" Elijah asked, pulling out a carefully worded document. Letitia's face tightened. "I can't date. Fire me." She hesitated, then scribbled a note. "Talk to Dr. Patel in oncology. He had a big fight with Jenkins last month about medication discrepancies. Said the numbers didn't add up." This small victory energized Elijah. Back at school, he asked Ms. Chin for help. "I need to improve my public speaking and writing for court. Can you help me?" Impressed by his determination, Ms. Chin began working with him during lunch, helping him organize arguments and practice speaking with confidence. "Project your voice from your diaphragm," she coached. "Stand straight. Make eye contact. Don't let them dismiss you because you're young." Meanwhile, Marcus grew increasingly worried about Elijah's crusade, but knew he couldn't stop the boy's determination. Instead, he introduced Elijah to his former law professor, Catherine James, a formidable woman with over 30 years of experience fighting systemic injustice. Professor James agreed to meet Elijah at her university office, clearly expecting a brief, polite conversation with a child. 3 hours later, she was still poring over his research, occasionally murmuring words like extraordinary or how did you find this? As Elijah explained his methods and discoveries, "You understand I can't represent your mother since I'm not licensed on her case," Professor James explained, "but I can advise you and maybe speak with our public defender about some of these irregularities." She studied Elijah's detailed timeline of hospital staff movements on the night of the alleged theft. "This is remarkably thorough. Where did you learn to do timeline analysis?" "YouTube tutorials," Elijah admitted, "and I read 3 books on evidence collection." Professor James shook her head in amazement. "Mr. Thompson, you have a more organized case file than many practicing attorneys I know." This growing network of support kept Elijah going through the tough times, especially at the county law library where security guards often assumed he was trespassing. "This isn't a babysitting service," one guard sneered, roughly grabbing Elijah's arm. "Where are your parents?" It took the intervention of another guard, Walter Freeman, to stop Elijah from being thrown out. "My son's about your age," Freeman told him afterward. "Wants to be a detective. You remind me of him, too smart for your own good." Freeman began letting Elijah use the law library during his shifts, sometimes pointing him toward helpful resources. Elijah's biggest breakthrough came from social media research, following a hunch about a connection between Judge Williams and Harold Jenkins. He spent hours digging through public profiles until he found photos from the Oakwood Country Club's annual charity golf tournament. There, Jenkins and Judge Williams smiled together, wearing matching polo shirts clearly familiar with each other. Further digging revealed they attended the same undergraduate university and belonged to the same fraternity. Most damning of all, Elijah discovered a 15-year-old newspaper article about a discrimination lawsuit against the country club for policies that effectively excluded black members, a lawsuit dismissed by none other than Judge Richard Williams early in his judicial career. Armed with this clear conflict of interest evidence, Elijah felt a surge of hope. Surely, once exposed, his mother's case would be reassigned to an impartial judge. Professor James tempered his optimism. The system protects its own, she warned, but this is definitely worth pursuing. Amid these small victories, Elijah kept visiting his mother whenever he could. Tanya had lost weight, and the dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights on a thin jail mattress. "Baby, you should be focusing on school, not all this legal stuff," she gently admonished when he described his investigations. "I'm so proud of you, but this isn't your burden to carry." Elijah squeezed her hand across the visiting room table. "You always taught me to stand up for what's right. That's what I'm doing." Leaving the detention center that day, Elijah felt the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders, but also a growing sense of purpose. The system had underestimated him because of his age and race, just as it had prejudged his mother. Their mistake would become his advantage. While Judge Williams and Harold Jenkins believed themselves untouchable, protected by privilege and position, they hadn't counted on the determination of an 11-year-old boy with an exceptional mind and unshakable sense of justice. The storm of evidence was gathering, and soon it would break over the Oakwood courthouse. The backlash came fast and harsh. 3 days after Elijah filed a formal complaint about Judge Williams' conflict of interest, he arrived at the detention center for his weekly visit with his mother, only to be turned away. "A new directive," the intake officer said flatly, pointing to a notice on his computer screen. "Tanya Thompson S. Visitation privileges are now restricted to legal counsel only." No amount of pleading changed the officer's impassive expression. "Take it up with the judge." He shrugged, clearly aware how futile that would be. Devastated, Elijah called Marcus from the payphone outside, struggling to keep his voice steady as he explained what had happened. Later, alone in the apartment that felt emptier without his mother, Elijah awoke to the sound of breaking glass. Frozen with fear, he listened as footsteps moved through the living room. Papers shuffled, drawers opened. Only after the intruders left did Elijah emerge from his hiding place in the closet, shaking uncontrollably as he surveyed the damage. Nothing seemed stolen, but his carefully organized research materials had been scattered across the floor, pages torn and crumpled. The message was clear. Someone wanted to intimidate him into stopping his investigation. When the police arrived, their cursory inspection and dismissive questions made it obvious they had little interest in solving the break-in. Probably just kids looking for valuables, one officer suggested, despite the fact his mother's laptop and television were untouched by morning. Marcus insisted Elijah stay with him until Tanya was released. "This has gone too far," he said grimly, helping Elijah pack some clothes. "We need to be smarter about how we approach this." Ms. Chin offered a solution to protect Elijah's research. "We'll create a secure online drive," she explained, helping him scan documents using the school's equipment after hours. "Multiple backups, password protected. They can't intimidate you if they can't destroy your evidence." Despite these precautions, the pressure mounted. News of the opposition intensified, and Elijah's school performance began to suffer as he split his attention between classwork and his mother's case. The principal called him in for a meeting, warning that his scholarship to the prestigious middle school program he'd been accepted to might be at risk if his grades didn't improve. Some community members, hearing only the prosecution's version, began treating Elijah differently. Parents who once greeted him warmly now hurried their children past him at the grocery store. "That's the drug nurse's boy," he overheard one woman whisper to another outside church. "Such a shame. Those people never think about how their actions affect their kids." Each setback only hardened Elijah's resolve. Working with Marcus, he drafted a formal complaint about Judge Williams' conflict of interest, documenting the social and professional ties between the judge and Harold Jenkins with meticulous detail. When the local bar association dismissed the complaint without investigation, citing insufficient evidence of bias, Professor James was not surprised. The old boys' network protecting its own, she said bitterly. We'll need another angle. That angle came from an unexpected source. Through Bailiff Rodriguez's sister, Elijah contacted Grace Patterson, a former administrative assistant at Oakwood General, who'd been fired after reporting Harold Jenkins for similar misconduct 2 years earlier. Initially hesitant, Grace finally agreed to meet Elijah at a small cafe far from the hospital. Jenkins has friends in hospital administration, she explained nervously, glancing toward the door. After I reported medication discrepancies, my performance reviews tanked. They found reasons to write me up until they fired me. Leaning in, she lowered her voice. But here's what you need to know. There's a blind spot in the hospital's security camera system near the medication room. It's been like that for years. They never fixed it because some staff use it to take unauthorized breaks. Jenkins knows about it. Perfect place to tamper with medication stocks without being seen. This crucial information filled a gap in Elijah's understanding of how medications could be taken without his mother appearing on security footage. As Elijah refined his timeline and evidence, he noticed growing isolation from his peers. Lunch tables emptied when he approached. Class partners suddenly had excuses to avoid working with him. Even some teachers began treating him differently, their expressions a mix of pity and discomfort. His refuge became the public library in Ms. Chin's classroom, where he could work undisturbed. Despite his best efforts, his grades continued to slip. The scholarship that had represented his best chance at Elijah's education, which could one day lead him to law school, seemed to be slipping away as his focus was divided. Seeing Elijah's struggle, Marcus helped him draft a formal letter, requesting Judge Williams' recusal from his mother's case, citing the newly uncovered evidence of bias and procedural irregularities. Don't get your hopes up, Marcus warned as they submitted the filing. Williams probably won't step aside, but at least we're creating a record of objections that could be useful in an appeal later. As Marcus predicted, the recusal request was denied, with a curt statement from Judge Williams. The court found no substantive evidence of bias and denied the motion. Furthermore, the court admonished the defense counsel to exercise greater discretion, warning against frivolous motions that waste judicial resources. Elijah's biggest breakthrough came late one night as he reorganized his digital evidence files. He noticed something odd in the hospital's digital medication logs. The timestamps on several entries had been altered after the fact, a subtle detail that would be easy to miss unless specifically searched for. This discovery renewed Elijah's energy, despite the mounting pressure. His mother had now been in detention for over a month, with her case crawling slowly through a system designed more to extract plea deals than uncover the truth. The trial date loomed just 6 weeks away, and Elijah knew time was running out to gather the evidence needed to clear her name. Lying in the unfamiliar bed in Marcus's spare room that night, staring at the ceiling, Elijah whispered a promise to his absent mother. I won't let them win. No matter what they do to stop me, I won't give up. The system had shown its true nature, not blind justice, but calculated oppression, protecting power and privilege. But systems are made of people, and people can make mistakes. Somewhere in the tangled web of lies surrounding his mother's case, someone had left a loose thread, and Elijah was determined to find it and pull until the whole fabrication unraveled. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday afternoon, sitting cross-legged on Marcus's living room floor. Surrounded by printouts of his research, Elijah had been reorganizing his findings, searching for any overlooked patterns. Suddenly, the disparate pieces snapped together like a complex puzzle, revealing its full image. The thefts, he murmured, eyes wide as he spread out his timeline charts. They're not random. With feverish intensity, Elijah created a new database correlating reported medication thefts across several county hospitals with staff schedules. The pattern emerged with startling clarity. Discrepancies in opioid inventory only occurred during shifts when Harold Jenkins was on duty, not just at Oakwood General, but also at 2 other hospitals where Jenkins occasionally filled in as a floating supervisor. The correlation was too perfect to be a coincidence. Excited, Elijah called Mrs. Baker, who had become a valuable ally. "I need to know how to request records from other hospitals without raising suspicion," he explained. "You've found something big, haven't you?" she asked, hearing the excitement in his voice. "Big enough to help my mom," Elijah confirmed. Mrs. Baker was silent for a moment. "There's a procedure for subpoenaing records and discovery, but that would alert Jenkins. Let me think. What about Jenkins's employment history? Have you looked into where he worked before Oakwood?" That suggestion sent Elijah down a new investigative path. Using Professor James' university credentials, he accessed public employment records and discovered Jenkins had quietly been let go from 3 previous hospitals under suspicious circumstances. Each departure coincided with internal investigations into medication inventory discrepancies. None resulted in formal charges, just quiet exits, followed by carefully worded reference letters. "He's been doing this for years," Elijah told Marcus one evening, spreading his findings across the kitchen table. "Moving hospital to hospital whenever suspicions arise, always blaming black nurses or other staff he has conflicts with." Marcus studied the evidence, his face growing increasingly troubled. "This is compelling, Elijah, but getting it accepted by a judge, especially Williams, won't be easy." With Professor James' help, Elijah drafted a motion for discovery to obtain employment records and medication logs that would establish the pattern of theft during Jenkins's shifts. As expected, Judge Williams mockingly denied the motion during a brief hearing, dismissing it as a fishing expedition and threatening contempt of court against anyone helping Elijah with frivolous filings. The threat sent a chill through Elijah's small network of supporters. Several withdrew, fearing for their careers or standing in the community. Even Marcus grew more cautious, especially after discovering his car vandalized in the courthouse parking lot. The word "stop meddling" scratched deep into the paint. Intimidation tactics escalated. Elijah noticed an unmarked car following him home from school one afternoon, trailing at a distance until he reached the safety of Marcus's apartment building. Anonymous calls began coming to Marcus' home phone late at night, silent on the line, or sometimes just heavy breathing before hanging up. Despite the growing fear, Elijah refused to abandon his investigation. "They're trying to scare us, because we're getting close to the truth," he insisted. His persistence paid off when a search through the Secretary of State's business filings uncovered a shell company, receiving regular payments from a pharmaceutical distributor. Further digging linked the shell company to Jenkins and, through a labyrinth of paperwork, to an offshore account with ties to Judge Williams. The evidence pointed to a sophisticated scheme. Jenkins diverted medications from hospital inventory. The pharmaceutical distributor replaced the missing meds at inflated prices, and profits funneled through the shell company to various beneficiaries, including, it appeared, Judge Williams himself. The discovery was both thrilling and terrifying. "This is bigger than just my mom's case," Elijah realized. "They're systematically stealing medications and selling them on the black market." His suspicions were confirmed when Jenkins confronted him at a grocery store while shopping with Marcus. The supervisor approached them in the cereal aisle, his smile tight and menacing. "Smart kid," Jenkins sneered. "Like you should know when to mind your own business." Ignoring Marcus, Jenkins loomed over Elijah. "Bad things happen to people who stick their noses where they don't belong, especially smart-mouthed kids who think they know more than they do." "Are you threatening a child, Mr. Jenkins?" Marcus asked coldly, stepping between them. Jenkins's smile never faltered. "Just some friendly advice. It'd be a shame if something happened to Ms. Thompson in detention. Jails can be dangerous places." As Jenkins walked away, Elijah realized his hands were shaking, Not from fear, but anger. Quickly, he pulled out his phone, which had been recording since Jenkins approached. "Did you get that?" Marcus asked, voice tight. Elijah nodded, playing back the recording where Jenkins's veiled threats were clearly audible. "Evidence," he said simply, saving the file to his secure cloud drive. The confrontation only hardened Elijah's resolve. That night, he called Nurse Washington with a bold request. "I need you to wear a recording device during your next shift with Jenkins," he explained. "We need to catch him giving instructions to alter records." "You're asking me to risk my job," she protested. "My career," Elijah corrected. "I'm asking you to help save an innocent woman and maybe stop other nurses from being falsely accused in the future." After a long pause, Letitia agreed. "For Tanya," she said, "and for every other black nurse who's been treated like we're disposable. Have you ever uncovered something much bigger and more dangerous than you expected? Comment below. Do you think Elijah should take his evidence directly to the FBI instead of continuing this risky investigation alone? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about brave individuals fighting injustice. The tiny recording device, disguised as a plain ID badge holder, felt impossibly heavy in Elijah's hand as he passed it to Nurse Washington in the back booth of a diner 20 meters from Oakwood. "Just act normal," he instructed, demonstrating how to activate the recorder with a subtle press. "If he says anything about altering records or medication inventory, try to get him to elaborate without seeming suspicious." Letitia's hands trembled slightly as she clipped the badge to her scrub top. "I keep thinking about my kids," she admitted quietly. "If I lose this job, every day in that jail cell," Elijah had whispered, "is another day my mom pays for something she didn't do." Letitia nodded slowly, then straightened her shoulders. "You're right, I'll do it." The next 48 hours were among the longest of Elijah's young life. He went through school in a daze, unable to focus. His thoughts stayed fixed on Letitia. She's safe. Was the recording working? Had Jenkins figured out their plan? Then finally, his phone buzzed. Done. Meet same place. Relief surged so hard through Elijah, he had to excuse himself to the bathroom. He splashed cold water on his face and took deep breaths to calm down. The recording exceeded anything he had hoped for. Alone with someone he believed to be a compliant employee, Jenkins had been crystal clear. "Adjust the fentanyl count like I showed you last time. Match the log, not the actual inventory. If anyone asks, you didn't see anything." His voice dropped ominously. "Remember what happened to Thompson when she couldn't follow simple instructions." Even more damning, Jenkins was caught instructing another employee to backdate medication logs. Change the timestamp to Tuesday. Make it show up under Mitchell's login, not mine. Elijah's research quickly revealed that Mitchell was another black nurse currently on administrative leave, pending investigation. The audio was powerful, but maybe not enough. Secret recordings could be ruled inadmissible in court. Elijah knew he needed ironclad documentary proof. Meanwhile, the threats against Marcus escalated. Calls came to their apartment at all hours, sometimes nothing but silence. Other times chilling messages, like their home address or Elijah's school schedule, read out slowly. "We should call the police," Marcus said after one especially eerie call. "They didn't care when our apartment was broken into," Elijah reminded him. "And we don't know who in law enforcement might be connected to Jenkins or Judge Williams." Elijah's instincts proved right. When Marcus filed a motion for reconsideration of discovery, he found his car vandalized the next morning. Slashed, windows shattered. The message was clear: back off, or else at school. Principal Whitman summoned Elijah to his office. The man's expression was a calculated mix of concern and discipline. "Your Burlington Academy scholarship requires a 3.8 GPA, he said. "You're at 3.2 and falling. And multiple teachers say you're distracted. I'm recommending a 2-day suspension. Maybe time away will help you refocus. It was punishment disguised as concern. Only Ms. Chen's quick intervention stopped it. This is discriminatory, she argued fiercely. Other students in crisis are offered support, not suspended. If you go through with this, I'll file a formal complaint with the district and the Educational Equity Board. The suspension was withdrawn, but the message was loud and clear. Power in Oakwood ran deep into the school system, the courthouse, and the hospital. Then came an unexpected breakthrough. Elijah found a thumb drive tucked in his backpack during class, with a sticky note on top, "For your mother." The drive held explosive hospital, financial records, discrepancies in medication inventories, and purchases spanning 2 years. Even more damning were emails between Jenkins and administrators using coded language to cover their tracks. That night, Elijah worked tirelessly, building a comprehensive timeline. The connections were unmistakable. Jenkins, missing medications, and a black market drug operation. The volume and precision of evidence made it impossible to dismiss. "We need to take this to someone outside Oakwood," Professor James said after reviewing the files. "I have a former student, she's an assistant DA in the next county. Public corruption cases are her specialty." They met Ada Caroline Rivera at Professor James' university office. Sharp-featured, quick-witted, Rivera listened intently as Elijah presented everything. "If even half of this is accurate," she said, "you've uncovered a major criminal operation. But Judge Williams has powerful allies. Without ironclad proof, going after him could destroy a prosecutor's career." "It is ironclad," Elijah said, his voice unwavering. "And every day my mother stays in jail is another injustice." Rivera studied him for a long moment. "I'll review the files. I'll make some discreet inquiries. That's all I can promise for now." Time was running out. Tanya's trial was just 2 weeks away. Judge Williams had accelerated the timeline, giving the defense little time to prepare. Another tactic to deny them a fair chance. Worse, Tanya had grown seriously ill in jail. A respiratory infection had gone untreated for days. "She needs real antibiotics and monitoring," Marcus said, having consulted a doctor friend. "If they keep stalling, this could turn into pneumonia." Elijah's fear for his mother only grew. He stayed up through the nights, organizing documents, anticipating every challenge. He was determined. When the moment came, he'd be ready. Then came the final key. Kevin Jean, the hospital's IT specialist, agreed to testify. "I reported the tampered timestamps," Jean told him. "Twice. They called it a system glitch, then transferred me to a satellite clinic, a demotion." With Jean's testimony, plus Ms. Chen and Professor James, Elijah had a solid foundation, a web of corruption exposed. Professor James tipped off local media anonymously. Soon, whispers about Judge Williams' record, especially his harsh rulings against black defendants, began to spread, but retaliation followed. Courthouse staff glared at Elijah. Anonymous notes appeared in his books. "Back off. Now. Accidents happen." Tanya's condition worsened. She was finally hospitalized with pneumonia, too weak to attend trial. "They'll paint her as uncooperative," Marcus warned. "We have to make it clear she's sick because of their neglect." The night before trial, Elijah made his most damning discovery yet. While combing through financial records, he found offshore payments tied to Judge Williams. Each payment aligned with the dismissal of charges against white defendants. This wasn't just bias. It was full-blown corruption. That night, Marcus' apartment was turned into a war room. Documents were labeled, arguments rehearsed, every detail prepared. They found that white nurses had their cases dismissed under similar evidence, while black nurses were prosecuted harshly. "Your first goal," Professor James reminded, "is to get the evidence on the record, even if Williams tries to silence you. Every word goes into the official transcript, that matters. Ms. Chen worked on Elijah's delivery. Speak as if you have every right to be heard, because you do. Marcus filed a last-minute motion to disqualify Judge Williams. As expected, it was promptly denied, curt and dismissive. Still, the media scrutiny provided a sliver of protection. Elijah had taken every possible step. As dawn broke, the courthouse stood cold and imposing. Elijah stood outside, breath visible in the morning air. In hours, his mother's trial would begin, presided over by a corrupt judge, built on falsified evidence, and driven by institutional rot, the weight of it all pressed down on him. He was just 11, a child, facing giants. Professor James appeared beside him with 2 cups of hot chocolate. She handed one to Elijah. "Second thoughts?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "Not about fighting for my mom, just whether I can actually win." She smiled. Faintly. "In 30 years of practicing law, I've learned one thing: justice doesn't always show up when we want it. But the truth has a power of its own, and you've armed it well." Elijah adjusted his tie, his mother's Christmas gift hand, mentally reviewed his checklist one final time. The evidence was neatly organized in his leather binder, with backup copies stored in secure locations. Their arguments were sharp. Their strategy was set. "Whatever happens today," Professor James said softly, "you've already achieved something incredible. You've exposed corruption that's hurt not just your mother, but countless others. That matters regardless of the outcome." Elijah nodded, drawing strength from her words, even as nerves twisted in his stomach. As they approached the courthouse steps, a black SUV pulled up beside the curb. The tinted window slid down to reveal Ada Caroline Rivera, her expression unreadable. "Professor James." "Mr. Thompson, a word before you go in." They approached the vehicle cautiously. Rivera glanced around, then spoke in a low voice. "I followed up on those inquiries. Your evidence is strong enough that certain federal authorities are now involved." She handed them a business card. "Special Agent Tamara Wilson, FBI Public Corruption Division. She'll be observing today's proceedings," Rivera said. "Do not acknowledge her or attempt to approach." With that, the window rolled up, and the SUV pulled away, leaving Elijah and Professor James staring at each other in stunned silence. "Federal interest," the professor murmured. "That changes everything." Inside the courthouse, they met Marcus and Ms. Chen in the lobby. The tension was heavy as they passed through security. Elijah's binder drew extra scrutiny, but after a long inspection, it was finally allowed through. Outside courtroom 3B, they huddled for one last strategy meeting. "No matter how Williams tries to provoke you," Marcus said, "stay calm. The transcript won't capture your tone, just your words. If he tries to have you removed," Professor James added, "comply immediately and respectfully. We can't help your mother if you're held in contempt." Elijah took a deep breath, thinking of Tanya lying weak in her hospital bed, fighting illness and the weight of injustice. "I'm ready," he said, and though his voice trembled slightly, he meant it. They stepped inside. The courtroom was unusually crowded. Attorneys, courthouse staff, and a few local reporters had come to witness the high-stakes proceedings. Elijah scanned the faces, wondering which sharp-eyed observer might be Agent Wilson. As they settled behind the defense table, Elijah felt an unexpected calm take hold. Weeks of fear, anger, and exhaustion condensed into one clear focus: the truth. Judge Williams might hold the gavel, but the facts were no longer in his control. Evidence had a weight of its own. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Richard Williams entered, his black robes sweeping behind him, silver-rimmed glasses catching the light. He surveyed the room with the air of a man who expected obedience. Elijah stood tall, meeting the judge's cold gaze, without flinching. "Call the case," Williams said, his voice steady, confident. "State of Maryland versus Tanya Thompson." Case number CR 2023 to 7842, the clerk announced. Charges include theft of controlled substances and violations of professional licensing statutes. The judge peered over his glasses. Where is the defendant? Porter rose. Your Honor, Ms. Thompson is hospitalized with pneumonia, contracted, while in detention. Her doctors advise. Convenient timing. Judge Williams interrupted. The court notes her absence and will consider revoking bail entirely, given this apparent attempt to delay proceedings. Elijah's fists clenched. That was a lie. Tanya had never been granted reasonable bail. She'd been detained from the start. Before he could stop himself, he stood. Your Honor, my mother's medical records clearly. Who is speaking in my courtroom? The judge snapped, eyes locking on Elijah with recognition and visible irritation. You again, bailiff. Remove this disruptive individual. Marcus quickly stood. Your Honor, Elijah Thompson is the defendant's son and a material witness in this case. He has the right to be present. Williams scowled. He has no right to speak out of turn. One more outburst, and I'll have him removed or not. Is that understood? Elijah nodded, sitting back down as Marcus gently guided him. The prosecution began. Assistant District Attorney Victoria Harmon painted Tanya as a manipulative nurse who had exploited her position to steal medications, conveniently ignoring the missing surveillance footage and inconsistent inventory reports. Elijah took careful notes on every misrepresentation. When Porter rose, he was clearly more prepared than he had been at the preliminary hearing. He wove in the core findings from Elijah's research. The evidence will show, Porter said, not only that Tanya Thompson is innocent, but that she was targeted after raising concerns about unsafe staffing concerns that disproportionately affected black patients. Judge Williams interrupted repeatedly, sustaining objections before the prosecution could even raise them. Stick to the facts, counselor, he warned. This court won't entertain conspiracy theories. The prosecution's first witness was Harold Jenkins, impeccably dressed, calm, and composed. He gave a carefully scripted version of events, irregularities discovered on Tanya's shifts, followed by her arrest. But during cross-examination, Porter, armed with Elijah's documentation, began poking holes. Mr. Jenkins, can you explain why the medication records show timestamp changes after Nurse Thompson's arrest? Jenkins hesitated. System glitches. IT has documented issues. Really? Porter challenged. Because the IT security specialist is prepared to testify that no such glitches were ever reported. In fact, we have evidence that you instructed staff to alter records directly. Judge Williams cut in sharply. Counsel, unless you have proof of these allegations, this court will not allow reckless attacks on reputable witnesses. Elijah saw his moment. He quickly passed Porter a note, referencing the binder and its exact exhibit numbers. Porter glanced at it, then stood straighter. Your Honor, we do have proof. Documentary evidence. Witness testimony. All included. In our earlier motion for discovery denied, without review. Judge Williams' face flushed. Mr. Porter, you're on thin ice. This court will not be used to launch baseless accusations against respected community members. And then Elijah could no longer stay silent. Elijah could stay silent no longer. Rising to his feet, binder in hand, he addressed the court directly. Your Honor, with all due respect, there is nothing baseless about the evidence showing that you and Mr. Jenkins have known each other for over 20 years. That you both belong to a country club previously sued for racial discrimination. And that you share financial ties through offshore accounts receiving payments from pharmaceutical distributors. A shocked murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Williams slammed his gavel, furious. This is outrageous. Bailiff, remove this child immediately. Before the bailiff could act, a calm, authoritative voice rose from the back. Before you do that, Your Honor, You might want to consider that. Removing him now would constitute interference with a federal investigation. Agent Tamara Wilson stood, holding up her FBI credentials. The FBI has been investigating a regional prescription drug trafficking operation tied to multiple hospitals. We believe this case is directly connected. The courtroom erupted in stunned whispers. Judge Williams went pale. "This is my courtroom," he said through clenched teeth. "Federal agent or not, you have no authority to interrupt these proceedings." Another voice cut in measured, commanding. "Actually, Your Honor, we do." A man in a dark suit rose beside Agent Wilson and approached the bench, producing a set of documents. "We have a federal warrant authorizing our presence and observation." While the judge scrambled to process the disruption, Elijah stepped forward, seizing the moment. His voice, clear and steady, echoed through the courtroom. "For the past 2 months, I've documented a pattern of corruption involving Harold Jenkins and Judge Williams. My mother, Tanya Thompson, discovered unsafe staffing practices at Oakwood General Conditions that disproportionately endangered black patients. When she reported them, she was framed for theft. To silence her, Elijah opened his binder, displaying charts, emails, and printed timelines to the gallery. "Our evidence shows medications have been systematically stolen from hospitals always during shifts supervised by Jenkins. Surveillance footage conveniently disappears, and the blame, it always falls on black nurses. White nurses accused under identical circumstances have had their charges dismissed by Judge Williams." The judge continued, banging his gavel, desperate to regain control. But Elijah pressed on months of preparation, now pouring forth inarticulate, damning testimony. Hospital financial records show large payments made to pharmaceutical distributors for replacement medications purchased at inflated prices. Those payments trace back to a shell company jointly owned by Jenkins and Judge Williams, hidden behind proxies. Bank records revealed deposits into offshore accounts that match the dates of case dismissals only for favored defendants. The room was silent now. No one moved. Every eye was fixed on the boy standing tall, wielding the truth like a sword. Judge Williams, voice rising, made one last attempt to assert control. "This proceeding is adjourned immediately. Bailiff, clear the courtroom." But the bailiff hesitated, caught between duty and the presence of the federal agents now positioned throughout the room. Agent Wilson stepped forward. "Richard Williams, you are under investigation for judicial corruption, racketeering, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. Effective immediately, we'll be executing search warrants on your financial records and communications." At that moment, federal marshals entered the courtroom. The judge's authority crumbled. As the commotion unfolded, Harold Jenkins attempted to slip out the side aisle, but another agent stepped into his path. "Harold Jenkins, you're wanted for questioning regarding evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and participation in a criminal enterprise." The courtroom, once dominated by the judge's presence, now belonged to justice, and its unlikely messenger was an 11-year-old boy with a binder full of truth and the courage to speak it. As federal agents secured the courtroom and began questioning witnesses, the formal proceedings dissolved into carefully managed chaos. Elijah remained standing, binder still in hand, as a wave of exhaustion and quiet triumph washed over him. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder, steady and proud. "You did it," he said gently. "Your mother's going to be free within hours." A federal judge ordered Tanya Thompson's immediate release. All charges were dismissed with prejudice. That evening, Elijah sat beside his mother's hospital bed, her hand wrapped in his. Though still weak, Tanya's eyes shone with pride and emotion. "My brilliant boy," she whispered through tears. "You stood up to the whole system, and won." "We won," Elijah corrected softly. "You taught me to fight for what's right, no matter how powerful the people trying to stop us." In the weeks that followed, the federal investigation widened. Both Jenkins and Judge Williams were arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and racketeering. More co-conspirators were identified across the hospital and local government, exposing the true scope of the corruption. 6 months later, Tanya fully recovered and reinstated at Riverside Medical Center with back paced proudly in the front row as Elijah testified before the State Judicial Oversight Committee. His testimony, clear-eyed and composed, led to new accountability measures for judges and prosecutors statewide. The very system that had tried to silence them was being reshaped, slowly but surely, because one boy refused to accept injustice as inevitable. 1 year after Tanya's arrest, on a bright spring morning, Elijah and his mother sat in the office of the state's prestigious Young Scholars Program. The committee chair, a dignified black woman with silver-streaked hair, smiled warmly as she slid an envelope across the desk. "A full scholarship," she said. "Through undergrad and law school if that's still your goal. Your academic record speaks for itself. But it's your courage and relentless pursuit of justice that truly impressed us." Outside the building, Tanya wrapped an arm around her son. "I always knew you were special," she said with a smile, "but I never imagined you'd change so many lives before your 12th birthday." Elijah looked up at her, the woman whose name he'd cleared with truth and fire. "Judge Williams didn't think I belonged in his courtroom," he said. "He was wrong. That's exactly where I belong." In the years that followed, Elijah Thompson's youth legal education program created to help underserved communities understand and navigate the justice system became a national model. The boy once told to sit down became a leading voice for those too long ignored. His painful experience became the foundation for lasting change. He proved that justice, brilliance, and transformation can rise from the places society underestimates most. What part of Elijah's journey inspired you the most? Was it his unshakable courage, his brilliant investigative work, or the way he stood tall in the face of power? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs a reminder. One person no matter how young can stand against injustice and win. Thank you for joining us on this journey. And remember, sometimes the most powerful voice in the room belongs to the one they tried to silence. Elijah's story is a powerful reminder that the fight for justice often demands extraordinary courage, especially when battling systemic racism. It shows us that youth is not a limitation, and that determination, knowledge, and moral clarity can ignite change even in the most rigid systems. It highlights how racism often hides within the structures of institutions, not just in individuals, and how truth, when meticulously documented and fearlessly presented, can dismantle corruption piece by piece. Just as importantly, Elijah's journey shows us the value of allies, teachers, mentors, and legal professionals who stood beside him when he needed it most. His transformation of personal pain into a tool for public good marks the ultimate victory. He didn't just free his mother, he lit the path for others to access justice, in a world where power often feels immovable. Elijah's story is a bold reminder. Systems are not changed by those who accept them, as they are bet by those who dare to fight for something better.